In Luke chapter 16, verses 14 to 26, we begin by seeing the response of the Pharisees, these religious leaders, to Jesus' teachings. They've been there. They've heard all that he's had to say about money and wealth and how to use it. And what Luke tells us is that they're sneering at Jesus, that they themselves are somewhat well off, that they're wealthy people, and that they like having the comforts of life. And so they're not appreciating Jesus' teachings or the implications of his teachings. And Jesus knows this, and so he responds to them, and then he tells this story about the rich man and Lazarus. And we're just going to look at the first part of this story today, but essentially what Jesus says is that there's a rich man, and he talks about the beautiful home that he lives in, and he has this ornate gate right at the entrance, and he has all this wealth. He's obviously loved and respected within the community. And then just outside the gate is a man named Lazarus. And it says that Lazarus was laying there tormented at the gate. And he had sores, and he was hungry, and he was begging, and he was just desperate for anyone to help him. And he was right there on the doorstep of the rich man. And the implication is obviously that the rich man did nothing to help him. Now, this is not a statement. Jesus isn't making a statement about wealth and that, all wealth is evil and that you can't serve God and be wealthy. He's not saying that at all. As a matter of fact, Abraham, when he died, would have been a very powerful and wealthy man. Joseph was second only to Pharaoh in all of Egypt and would for sure have been very wealthy. And there's King David, who himself was a king, and there was Solomon. I mean, the Bible is full of people who were wealthy, and yet they served God and they honored God. But it had to do with their heart, right? What God said about King David is that he was a man after God's own heart. That God looked at his heart, not at the outward, right? And so what Jesus is trying to unearth, open our eyes to see, is that our wealth, depending on how we use it, reveals something about our heart. We said that yesterday as well. But what's interesting about this story of the rich man is it's not necessarily that he was a bad person. Sometimes we read these stories and think, oh yeah, they were a bad person. It doesn't say that he was a bad person. It doesn't say he lied or cheated. For all we know, he could have been a hardworking businessman who earned that money fairly, and there was nothing wrong at all with him having the things that he had. The problem was what he did with his wealth, or more likely, what he didn't do with his wealth. If you look at Luke chapter 16 and verse 20 and 21, this is what Jesus says. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The most damning three words in that whole little section there is even the dogs. In verse 21, even the dogs. What Jesus is saying is that the dogs treated this man with more humanity than the rich man ever did. The rich man treated him worse than a dog. And what God is saying to us is that what we do with our resources, it's not just about, are you hardworking? Are you honest? Are you upright? Are you doing the right things? Does it look good on the outside? This was the indictment against the Pharisees. In verse 14 and 15, the Pharisees who loved money heard all of this and were sneering at Jesus. And Jesus' response is, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Jesus tells this story immediately after because he says, look, it doesn't matter if it looks like you're a hardworking person who's earned your money and you're doing nice things. God says, what is your heart revealing? Are you caring for the people right on your doorstep? At the end of the day, Jesus' point is simple and quite similar to what he said yesterday. If your heart belongs to God, so does your money.